Garry Putland from Sophie's Legacy joins me now. Garry and his family formed the charity after his daughter, Dr. Sophie Putland, died by suicide in 2021 while working as a veterinarian. Garry, thank you for joining me on the program today.
Thank you, Selina.
Garry, is it time for a parliamentary inquiry here in South Australia into the veterinary industry?
Absolutely. Sophie's Legacy is very supportive. In fact, we think it's vital that this proposal that Sarah's put forward is actually agreed to, because we really believe that the high pressures that Sarah has talked about is something that's been around for a long time, and we really need something to be done because there's a current mental health crisis in the veterinary profession, and that's leading to a high suicide rate and things like that. So we actually think this is very well needed.
What would you like to see this any inquiry focus on? What questions do you think particularly would need to be answered?
So, Sarah's actually articulated a lot of the issues that we found when we actually surveyed vet staff, things like the poor pay, the long working hours. We also heard things like toxic workplaces, and another thing that contributes significantly, or what the people said contributed significantly to the poor mental health, was client abuse, which was often as a result of bill shock. So there is an issue around the business model associated with the veterinary profession, and what people nowadays expect high quality health care for their pets, which they get, but whether they're prepared to pay for that is another matter. And things like that, I think, need to be addressed.
You gave evidence, I believe, to a similar inquiry that New South Wales held earlier this year or later last year. Did you see that as a worthwhile exercise to bring some of these issues to light?
Absolutely. We're delighted that the New South Wales Senate inquiry gave us an opportunity to actually put our view, which we actually said to them that it was really important to address the vet shortage. That was their particular focus, because the vet shortage had significant impact on the things like the work hours. And so we see that having that opportunity to get in and talk to politicians, and particularly when this is an industry that contributes so much to the economic, social and emotional well-being of many Australians. We know about 70% of Australians now have pets. We think this industry is undervalued, under-resourced, and most importantly, in a crisis where it's actually killing the people that are so devoted to it, and we want that to be addressed.
Garry, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
Garry Putland there from Sophie's Legacy, throwing his support behind calls for a parliamentary inquiry into the veterinary industry here in South Australia. One Nation MLC Sarah Game recently gave a speech in state parliament talking of her own struggles as a veterinarian and calling for an inquiry into what's been called a mental health crisis.
Well, firstly, before my career in politics, I worked as a veterinarian, and so I've seen first-hand the strain on veterinarians and the veterinary industry. And also the statistics back up what I've seen, which is that, unfortunately, our veterinarians have a very high suicide rate. It's 4 times that of the general population and 2 times that of other medical professionals like doctors and dentists. And we also have a big problem with retaining our vets. Vets make a big contribution to our society, not just with pets and the wonderful impact on our well-being from owning pets, but farm animals, production and biosecurity. And I think we're a pet-loving nation, and we need to be a vet-loving nation and look after our vets.
I know that other states have conducted similar inquiries, or particularly New South Wales has conducted a similar inquiry. Do you see something along the lines of that, and whether that has been a worthwhile endeavour?
Well, I'm certainly keeping an eye on what the other inquiries are doing, and I think those reports are coming out soon. I want this inquiry to particularly focus on the impact of financial strain and high workload on veterinary mental health and well-being and low retention rates. I'm hoping that we're going to obviously get some good tangible outcomes and government support for those outcomes. But I'm also hoping that driving this inquiry and being able to talk to people like yourselves, we're going to do some myth busting. And I think there's just 2 myths that I do want to take the opportunity to bust. And one is that vets have a good wage. They don't. Most vets are earning between $80,000 and $100,000 a year. Many veterinarians earn less, and when you think that the veterinarian you see in the morning is often the same vet that you see in the evening, might be the same one who's worked on the weekend or overnight in country areas, it's a very low pay. And the other one is when you do hear community aware about the stress of being in the veterinary industry, they naturally assume, well, it must be stress from dealing with sick animals. Now, no one wants to deal with a sick animal or the sadness of a sick animal, particularly when you can't make them better. But really, I want to start changing that narrative, because I believe, and certainly all the feedback I've had from my veterinary colleagues, is that actually it's not dealing with sick animals, it's the very, very high pressure that they're under in terms of work hours, the load of work they have to do within those hours, coupled with the very poor pay. And I think they're just getting really, really run down.
As you say, this is an industry you have yourself worked in, and does that sort of mirror with your experience of working as a vet, those long hours, that low pay, that extra stress and pressure of an industry that needs more hands on deck?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember first graduating and working in a practice where you worked 12-hour days, you worked weekends, you took the phone overnight for $30, you were back at work the next day. It didn't matter if you'd been up all night. And I remember doing a calving one evening, or actually I think it was about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. I'd been, kicked and so on, and it'd been a very physical job. I had a veterinary student with me, and I was so exhausted I actually managed to bulldoze the farmer's fence on the way out, but I was expected back at work the next day. Now, I think particularly our rural and regional vets are under those sorts of extraordinary pressures, and I think people need to realise that veterinary care is not subsidised the way, obviously, that human care is. And so these businesses are under pressure and their employees are under a lot of pressure.
So you've made this formal call for South Australia to get an inquiry underway. Have you had much of a response or feedback as to whether there is support for that?
I think there definitely is some support. I know of individual members within various parties who are supportive, but whether or not they've got a whole party stance on this matter at the moment is to be seen. I think what I'm calling for is for this veterinary inquiry to have its own committee, and I want that to consist of members from all parties and to get real tangible outcomes. So I will be calling it to a vote towards the end of the year, or give it a few more months, because we're about to have a big parliamentary break. But I would really appreciate listeners, if they do support this matter, to write to their local member and say, come on, let's support this veterinary inquiry.
That's One Nation MLC Sarah Game speaking there. Hey, if this conversation has caused you any concerns or brought up any issues, please do remember that Lifeline is available 24/7 and you can contact them on 13 11 14.